Joining me now is Stanislav Belkovsky, a well-known Russian political analyst, writer, and media personality. He has spent years explaining how people in the Kremlin think and what drives their decisions. As Putin continues the war in Ukraine and loses support even from old allies, Mr. Belkovsky is here to help us understand what's really behind the Kremlin's choices. Is it strategy, fear, or something more personal like obsession? Mr. Belkovsky, welcome to the studio.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation.
So I just want to begin from the recent Washington Post article, where a journalist describes Putin's refusal to compromise on Ukraine as a colossal strategic error that is costing Russia its regional influence, global allies, and future in energy markets. From your perspective, is Putin aware of this erosion, or is he entirely consumed by what some describe as an emotional obsession with Ukraine? And you said that not only once.
First and foremost, it's stipulated by Putin's emotional obsession with Ukraine. I would emphasize that even there were no Putin, but another person president of Russian Federation, even such a anti-democratic person, but not Putin himself, there wouldn't be any such a war with Ukraine. Ukraine is his personal point. And he is quite convinced that he should suppress and oppress Ukraine as soon as possible. And his principal political goal is to make Ukraine the Russia-dependent state, some kind of affiliated society of the autocracy he has built up in the modern Russia. Putin had all the chances to come to some kind of pact with Donald Trump, new American leadership, this spring. But one of the conditions of this pact, who could lead to normalization of Vladimir Putin, to reintegration of himself and Russia's elite into global elites, and to accomplishment of some large-scale investment programs and projects connecting Russia and the United States. But under the conditions of that pact was certainly a ceasefire in Ukraine. And then Putin, being very close to this pact, to such decision, convinced himself that if he would not force Ukraine to his conditions, including the recognition of Russian jurisdiction over the 5 occupied regions of Ukraine, and another point is a power change in Kyiv, because Putin doesn't want to communicate with Vladimir Zelensky anymore and firmly wants to deal with some next power, any other figure who would come after Zelensky and instead of him. And so would he'll lose this opportunity forever. And so he's going to postpone the pact with Trump after, under the conditions of harsh military pressure, he, in his opinion, could force Ukraine to meet his conditions. And secondly, Putin is very eager to meet Donald Trump himself in Beijing on the 3rd of September this year. Donald Trump is invited there by China's chairman Xi Jinping to the military parade dedicated to the 80th anniversary of Second World War, and Putin is invited there as well. And so that's the very reason of those 60 days proposed by Putin and his last but not least phone conversation with Donald Trump on the 3rd of July, or 50 days as it's been formulated by Donald Trump on the 14th of July. It's both 60 days of Putin's and 50 days of Trump do terminate on the 3rd of September. Putin is very eager to meet Trump there, and within this companion, with the presence of Xi Jinping and Trump, to decide the destiny of Ukraine. He is very hopeful that Trump would succeed to him, to meet his requirements concerning Ukraine. But without meeting these requirements, Putin is by no means going to stop the war and to come to any kind of armistice or ceasefire.
Stanislav, but if this meeting in Beijing is gonna happen, it's gonna happen definitely. But if American president will arrive, what signal it's going to give to the world? I mean, does it seem like the United States will turn their back to Ukraine?
No, Donald Trump himself and personally has come to power as a consistent opponent of political establishment, both of his own country, the Washington establishment, European establishment, and so on. And that's why he's not very fond of Ukraine, and he's not a friend of Vladimir Zelensky and Ukrainian leadership, which he considers as an inalienable component of this global political establishment. He doesn't like European establishment because, in his opinion, Europe has done its best to prevent Donald Trump from coming to power, keeping the power, and getting back to power in 2024. And this idea of the revenge is is one of the key points of Trump's informal political agenda. On the other hand, he's going to deal with Russia and Vladimir Putin to get it a little bit away from China and to get control over some important natural resources of Russian Siberia and Far East, including lithium and other metals, materials so crucially important under the conditions of modern technological revolution. Thirdly, Trump is going to make a deal with China and to put stop to this trade war initiated by himself in order to change the basic rules of this interaction with China. So all this could lead Donald Trump to Beijing, potentially, if he would come to the conclusion that this summit in Beijing on the 3rd of September could help him to resolve the key problems of his agenda. And he is formally invited by Xi Jinping. This proposal is firmly supported by Putin, but certainly the decision is not made yet. But when Trump agreed to postpone the sanctions and new trade barriers against Russia for those renowned 50 days, he emphasizes he's considering such an opportunity. He considers the war in Ukraine as first and foremost Europe's problem, and he could support Ukraine with arms, but through Europe and at Europe's expense. It's NATO countries' expense, which has already started, but we know that the pace of those arms supply is very low, and by the 3rd of September, Ukraine could hardly obtain the basic part of the arms promised by America and other NATO countries, first and foremost the Patriots. It would take several months to get new Patriots, even the German ones, which have to be replaced by American supply some later. And of course, he's warned by many of his representatives of his inner circle that Biden's war, as he depicted this war in Europe, war in Ukraine, should not turn into Trump's war. And that's why but at the same time, he's very disappointed by Putin's unwillingness and unreadiness to bring the situation to armistice, to ceasefire, because Trump promised it to his constituents, he promised it to America, and the most important, to himself. That's why he's now balancing between his readiness to come to some agreement with Putin, to his willingness to reach some new agreement with China, and to his obligation to put stop to this war. And the decision has not been made yet.
Stanislav, what were you saying about the disappointment of a Donald Trump by Putin? I mean, what signs gives you that, except that he's posting that on Truth Social?
We'll see it by and before the 3rd of September.
Okay.
First, we will have to find out if this meeting in Beijing would actually take place or not. If it takes place, it's one agenda. If it doesn't take place, Trump would oppose to the plan proposed by both Xi Jinping and Putin. Secondly, we'll know if Trump would really launch those tariffs, those sanctions against Russia on the 3rd of September, as he promised to do, when the situation would not come to armistice by the term. And now Russia exports about 5 million barrels of crude oil daily. And this volume could, to a certain extent, be replaced by different sources from Middle East countries, some countries of Latin America, like Argentina and Guyana, and by the United States themselves. But at the same time, the biggest consumer of this Russian oil is China, with 2.2 million of barrels daily. And so there's still unclear if China would really refuse the Russian oil, if it would conform to new Trump sanctions regime. Or it, by today, at least, those promises of Donald Trump to impose those tariffs, 100% tariffs on Russian oil, is considered by many market players and by many countries as bluffing. Maybe it's because Trump as a player usually uses bluff as a tool of his as an important weapon of his pressure on his potential partners and counterparts. And so, in my opinion, the situation is still unclear. Putin has promised to Trump that military pressure he could impose on Ukraine by the 3rd of September would be hard enough to make Ukraine to meet some Russian requirements or some successions to the situation by and before the potential summit at Beijing would be some different from the 3rd of July when they discussed all the circle of problems. But we still don't know what would do Vladimir Putin, what new radical steps he would undertake in the military field, because, of course, whereas the front line is not so important for such kind of war, because the key point, the key objective of Vladimir Putin is the exhaustion of Ukraine, to get Ukraine exhausted enough, to get a retrieve of critical resources, including mobilization resource and psychological resource to resist, the will to and willingness for resistance, to make Ukraine to meet some conditions which still are, of course, hardly acceptable for Kiev.
Why do people in Kremlin don't understand that it works quite opposite? I'm not talking about the people on the battlefield, but psychologically, it just makes Ukrainians stronger.
Putin has a perception of its own of Ukraine. He has launched this war more than 1,200 days ago, being quite sure he could put stop to actual Ukraine independence in a couple of weeks. And he pinned his greatest hopes on the total betrayal of Ukrainian elites, including bureaucratic and military ones. And he's still quite sure that being deprived of American support, and which cannot be fully replaced by European support, European arms and money, Ukraine would go to principal concession soon enough. And there is no one who could dissuade Vladimir Putin. Don't forget, Viktor Medvedchuk is still his key advisor onto the full scale of Ukraine questions and problems, and not in vain, because Vladimir Putin and Medvedchuk share the same attitude to Ukraine, that Ukraine is a false, fake statehood, false identity, which is created artificially by Russia's enemies in the West to counterbalance Russia's influence in the space of its former empire. And that would lead Vladimir Putin to his next military and political steps inevitably. The strategy would not be changed. Vladimir Putin would never step down from this, from his doubtless willingness to destroy Ukraine as independent statehood and turn it into a Russian satellite.